You're listening to the Engaged Club podcast, where we believe that engagement of members, staff, and managers is the key to a thriving club.
Our aim is to help you become a better club manager by giving you practical, actionable club management and marketing advice.
I'm Roger Kincaid. I'm the marketing director at Off Course Golf. We make member and customer engagement tools for club managers that make growth and prosperity their business. You can find out more about what we do at offcourse.golf.
And I'm Jim Hope. I've been managing clubs and working in the hospitality business for nearly 40 years. I now proudly serve the members of the Derrick Golf and Winter Club in Edmonton, Alberta as their GM and COO. Roger, in this episode, I'd like to delve back into board governance if we could. I was away last week at a tournament called the Challenge Cup, which is hosted by the Superintendents Association, and about 40 clubs from the Alberta market attend for it's 2 days, but 3 days if you throw in a practice round. And every single GM that I ran into over a beer, and we're just chatting about their club, governance became part of our topic of conversation. And I'd like to spend some time today, if I could, delving more into what good board governance looks like.
Well, yeah, I know it's important, and I think it's pretty cool that that people are coming to you to talk about that. Maybe they've heard a past episode and popped up a question and said, "I got to make sure I ask Jim about this next time I'm staring at him across a pint of beer." So, yeah, man, let's dig right into it. This podcast is supported by the Canadian Society of Club Managers. Away we go.
So, when you talk about board governance, it really starts with the nominating process, which I think in episode 86, we talked about the need for a really strong nominating committee process. And part of that first step of the nominating committee is that the board need to do a skills matrix to make sure that there's a really clear understanding as to what skills are on the board, what voids you might have on your board, so that the nominating committee can go out and find somebody with those necessary skills, i.e. an accountant or a lawyer, or if you're doing construction, maybe somebody with some construction experience that is able to bring that expertise to the board to help the management team in the delivery of a project. So once you've done that board skills matrix, you fire that off to the nominating committee, and they'll help fill those voids for you. And then one of the things the boards need to do, just like the boards do with us and we do with our team, is they need to do an evaluation. And at our club, our board annually does a board self-evaluation. They do one on themselves, and they do one on all other 8 directors as well. And we compile that information. Our governance committee gets that, and our board gets that. So they can see how they were rated as individuals by their peers, and also what areas that they think as a group they may need to improve on. And those are questions of did they, were they show up to the meeting on time? Were they engaged? Had they read their information ahead of time? Did they follow up effectively with anything they were supposed to do? Did they lead their committees effectively? So it's pretty general information, but it certainly gives them a bit of an overview as to how they've done as a director. So, you've got a nominating committee that's finding the people with the skills you need. You've got a board that's evaluating themselves so that they can continue to get better. And then you end up in these board meetings on a monthly basis. And some of them, talking to managers are really enjoyable. They have fun. They're engaging. They're learning opportunities. They share information. And then other ones, people are literally dreading going into that meeting. They don't know if the meeting is going to last 35 minutes or it's going to last 3.5 hours. And I've known clubs where they've adjourned the meeting because it's gone on too long and they haven't gotten through all the items on the agenda. And they've had to reconvene the meeting the next day or a day later when they could get everyone together to get through the information in a monthly meeting. I mean, it's just... Sounds awful. Oh, yeah, it's awful. I mean, you can just imagine how they're, delving into the operations if they're taking that long at a meeting. And right. One of the managers I was talking with on this trip is really adamant. He's really trying to convert the governance at their club. And so he's really adamant that he's driving the agenda at the board meeting. So, the next thing I did want to talk about was, the building of the agenda for the meeting. And in most cases, my experience has been that I do that with the president. It's a pretty standard agenda, from a committee report standpoint. We talk about anything that's coming up that meeting, either from committee meetings and reports, or items that have just they're servicing that we want to have for discussion. And we determine where that's going to go, whether it stay in a committee report or it get pulled from a committee report and ends up in the GM report. And at our club, we've adopted the use of a consent agenda. And what a consent agenda is, for those that aren't aware of it, is when you take your operating committees, which in our case is our golf committee is co-chaired by our superintendent and our golf professional, our rec committee, which is chaired by our athletic director, our social committee, which is chaired by our F&B manager, our building, which is chaired by our facilities, and our membership and marketing, which is chaired by me. So we take those 5 committees and we put them in what we call a consent agenda. So if all 5 of those committees met 1 month, we send our information package out to the board about 4 or 5 days before the meeting. The intent is that the directors doing their diligence are going to read those reports. If they have any questions, they can ask me because I would have attended those meetings, or they're welcome to go to the department head and ask any questions they have on the report. And then we package all those together in what we call a consent agenda. And on the board, at the board meeting, the president says approval for the consent agenda, which means I'm approving the 5 reports, which are just information. We don't need someone to reread them, which I've seen 6 or 7 reports given at a board meeting by each director submitting a report a week at a time, and then they read it verbatim at the board meeting. I mean, that's a pretty common practice, actually. So in this case, we say, no, the directors are saying, well, I've read the information. I don't have any questions. If I did, I got them answered. So we approved the consent agenda, and all 5 reports are approved at the same time.
Wow. That's very efficient.
Yeah, it's out of the way. And what happens, though, is if they have a question on one of the reports, we pull that report from the consent agenda. We approve the balance. So say there was 5 reports and they have a question on one. We pull that report from the consent agenda. They approve the other 4, and then we talk about whatever the specific question is that they have on that one report. Then we approve that report, and we move on to what would be the board committees, which would be secretary treasurer, long-range planning, house and discipline, which is just that, it's for discipline of members, and then our nominating, governance, and committees. And the nominating governance don't meet on a monthly basis. Long-range planning pretty much does. House and discipline only meet when necessary, and the secretary treasurer obviously has a report both from a membership and from a finance standpoint on a monthly basis. So the only 3 reports that we talk about consistently would be the secretary's report, the treasurer's report, and the long-range planning report. All of that information is given out ahead of time. And again, a director is encouraged to ask a question before the meeting if they do have one. One of the things that we adopted at our board meeting last night, which was created by our finance chair, who's a CA and just a brilliant mind, a finance mind, was we created a financial dashboard. So we took about 12 key points that we feel that the board need to be aware of and consider. And we gave them a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. And if they're above budget by 5%, they get a green light. If they're below or above budget by only 5%, so below budget by 5 or above budget by less than 5, they get a yellow light. And if they're below by 5, they get a red light. So the board can just look at that, look at the red lights and go, okay, well, let's talk about these. And it's just going to speed up the adoption of those reports, but also keep the board focused on what they need to be focused on. All the backup information is there. So we haven't taken information away. We've just focused on what we're going to talk about at the board meeting. That's really, the dashboarding is really common in business today. And I think clubs are starting to adopt that. So we've adopted that both from a finance standpoint and from a treasurer, which is a membership standpoint about where we are, their membership levels. And with us, with 5,000 members and a whole bunch of different categories, there's a bunch of moving parts that we need to look at, and we want the board to be aware of on a monthly basis.
This just sounds so amazing, Jim. As I'm following along, you're basically setting something up where everybody can arrive at the meeting, A, knowing exactly what's going to happen, and B, having had to do their homework. So that whole consent agenda thing, it's like you said, that they can, do their own assessments and get their own questions answered before this meeting begins. And then you can knock those right off the table unless there's something outstanding. And then, you've got it where the treasurer will talk about pertinent business. The discipline committee might not have to meet. The long range planning, they can talk about their business. The And so you've got this way of saying, look, we've got an hour for this meeting. The last 45 minutes of it, if we're pretty good, can be drinking coffee and talking about the weather.
Yeah, you bet. That's exactly it. I mean, we've actually changed the format of our meetings where we're taking half an hour out of an hour and a half agenda, and we're going to talk nothing but strategic issues, because we know that that's where we need the board knows they need to be focused and thinking about that. So we'll lay out a strategic issue at our meeting last night when we laid out 3 of them that they may have they charged us with management to give them some information, and we'll get that out ahead of time, and then we'll discuss that at the board meeting. And one of the things we do too that really works well is we'll ask the question a lot at a board meeting: is this strategic or is this operating? And if the discussion is leading towards operating, our president, who is just excellent, stops the conversation and says, "Okay, we don't need to talk about this anymore. This is an operating issue. We're going to turn this over to management to handle." And it does take, and any manager listening to this is going to look at me and they're shaking their head. Yeah, I get it, Jim. But, we don't have maybe have the leadership on our board or the understanding of why it's important to do the things that you just talked about. And I get that. I get that if you don't have that support from the elected directors, that you're not going to be able to do this. But, again, we've always talked about trying to eat an elephant one bite at a time. If you can take off pieces of this, like just get the consent agenda in, the balance of it might fall into place a little easier for you. So we always ask that question: is this operating strategic? We also have a board calendar, which is really detailed on a month-by-month basis as to what the board needs to do so that nothing ever gets forgotten. It's a living document. We're adding to it all the time. So, what we know we need to do in July, we know what we need to do in August, and we talk about that at the meeting so that they know what's on their plate and responsibilities they have in the upcoming month. And then we go in camera. We support the fact that our accountant, our controller, attends our meetings. And so we do 2 in-camera sessions. John leaves the meeting, and then they have an in-camera session with me. I leave the meeting, and the board have an in-camera session about me. And then the next day, which in this case is today, I'll be calling the president, and he'll fill me in on anything that they talked about in the in-camera session. So very transparent. I was against in-camera sessions when they first came out. It rubbed me the wrong way. It sort of bit into my confidence a little bit as well. And then I realized that if you don't do it in an organized fashion, they're going to do it anyways in the lounge over a beer.
That's right. They're doing it around the club.
Yeah, they're doing it anyway. So why not do it in a formatted fashion that there's a set agenda as to what they can and can't discuss in that in-camera session. So I think if you can sort of lay yourself out with, a good self-evaluation, a consent agenda. We also read our mission statement at the beginning of every meeting, so we just keep ourselves focused on what our purpose is. Stick to the agenda. Ask the question if it's operating or strategic. Keep your board organized with a board calendar so they know what they're supposed to be doing this month and what's coming up in future months. And let the board and support the board going in camera. And I think you got a chance at having a real good governance model.
No question about that. I think that as this goes along, as people listen to this podcast and maybe re-listen to it, this episode, they'll have questions about the individual points that you raised. And, we welcome them. Send those to hello@engagedclub.com. Jim, I've got a question. I'm just going to hang it out there. It's a question for a further episode. But, you're talking about having this really efficient meeting where the board works together to get stuff done. What do you do about that one board member who really looks forward to these meetings as an opportunity to complain and, get on a soapbox and be heard? So that's something to consider for a future episode. I'm sure you can handle it with aplomb, my friend.
I like that one, Rich, because, it never happens. So that'll actually be a lot of fun to do. What do you do with that dissident director, right, who just doesn't want to follow the program? You bet. I'm making a note of that right now.
Absolutely. We'll get to that down the road.
We really hope this episode is a big help to you. If you know somebody else that could benefit from this episode, please share it and let's grow together.
Yeah, the archive of this podcast is available at engagedclub.com, where you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our Slack space for more discussion. And of course, we'd always like to hear your thoughts, questions, ideas, comments, anything you have to say via email at hello@engagedclub.com. Thanks for listening.